All right, thank you very much. Happy to be here. I'm sorry I have to be talking about plants that are being stolen, but maybe there's some hope here, and I'll try not to have it all be downbeat. But I've been working with Dudleyas for quite a long time. I started going to grad school, and I thought, okay, well, I want to study maybe some succulents, so I opened up the old flora, you know, the MUNs, and started looking through to see what succulents were there, and maybe they had different chromosome numbers and what might be fun. And happened to plot Dudleyas, and I thought, well, maybe I'll study these for 2 or 3 years. That was 1983, and so I'm still working on them. This is one of my hybrids that I made, stuck in a little pot that looks like a rock that one of my friends made. So I'm going to be talking about poaching and some of the other threats to these native succulents. Some of the responses we might have to poaching, new cultivars that I've been developing. You know, in the course of my research, it looked like a lot of Dudleyas were hybridizing with each other. And I wanted to see, okay, well, is this really true? And so I hybridized things with each other. And then as long as I was doing that, you know, every once in a while a pretty one would come up. So, you know, maybe somebody else would like to grow some of those. And I started doing some of that intentionally to try and make pretty plants too. And then I may just have time to talk randomly about some of the California species. I won't be talking too much about Baja California tonight, but Native Plant Society now goes down into Baja California too, so that wouldn't have been off topic. So this would have been a nicer way to have Dudleyas be famous. You know that movie that came out a little while ago, Free Solo? Let's see if this pointer works. We'll look right down here. See that? Every time Alex Honnold was up there with no rope, he's or even with the rope, and he's practicing the boulder move, the hardest, scariest move on the entire movie, on the entire climb. Right down here, there was a plant that probably looked just like that. And, you know, I don't know why people weren't focusing on that instead of him, but anyway, I would much rather would have had this be the reason why Dudleyas were famous. You can see sometimes they are green, green form. People call them, it just means, you know, they don't have the white wax on them. Sometimes the green form, if they get a lot of sun on them, they'll be red, but they're still the green form. But anyway, you get the idea. The waxy and the non-waxy. This fellow, I was fortunate to be able to go out on to one of the islands, or a couple of the islands with. Michael Benedict was walking along on Cedros Island. He, you know, amateur botanist with the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, just a volunteer there. And he knew Dudleyas. And he's walking along on Cedros Island, and he sees an upside-down rosette. He picks it up, turns it over, and says, "Oh my goodness, this is a new species. This is completely different from anything that I've ever seen." And he looked around for another hour and couldn't find another one. Wow. And it was just a rosette, upside down, not attached to roots or anything. Just, you know, they live forever, so they stay, you know, they stay fleshy for a long time. But he went back with Reed Moran, who was the, you know, the Dudleya expert, and they ended up naming the plant Dudleya pachyphytum. And this is a cutting of the original plant that they took the, you know, the herbarium specimen so they could name it. And so here's Michael Benedict with his plant, and that was pretty fun to connect with him after all of those years. And Michael says, "Oh, well, you know, by the way, I've got this other one from southern Baja California. You need to name that too, Steve. So here, I'm loaning you my plant." And it bloomed this year, and it was pretty different. I don't have close-ups that are good. But I might have to name another one. But this is his Dudleya pachyphytum. He named with Reed Moran. In habitat out on Cedros Island. You have to, you know, drive to San Diego, drive another, you know, 400 miles to Guerrero Negro, take the taxi out to the plane, get inspected, take the plane to the island, get inspected, get in the pickup truck, go to the Ponga, the little boat, take the boat to the North Shore, go over there and camp. Next day, 2-3 miles straight uphill to the ridge, and on the other side of the ridge is where this plant is. First time I went out there, there was somebody who'd gone out and done all of this and hadn't gotten there. and was kicking himself, and he was 70 years old. He says, "I'm going to get there this time. I don't care. I don't care how hard it is to get there." But unfortunately, even from the first time this was named in 77 or 78 and put in botanic gardens, people have been stealing this. But people started stealing it even more. So in this particular one, Semper Vivum, live forevers, they were stolen. They inspected the back of a big semi-truck, and it happened to be these were kind of stuck in the corner of the semi-truck, and so they found them. So this was sort of one of the first clues we were getting that more of this was going on a bigger scale.
What year was that?
That was 2.5, 3 years ago. There had been a number of people from Korea coming over and visiting. I had 3 different groups from Korea visiting me, trying to buy really pretty red Echeverias. But when they were over here, going to every nursery they could, finding these Echeveria ebony, a cultivated plant originally from Mexico, but they were seeing Dudleyas in the nurseries. And not that long afterwards, Cedros Island is really hard to get to, but Dudleya farinosa is sort of a, poor man or woman's Dudleya pachyphytum. They're all up and down the California coast, and people started coming and stealing them. Somebody waiting behind somebody in line in a post office. There's 60 boxes being shipped to Asia, and dirt was falling out, and the person was, what's going on here? Shh, I've got something really special. And so, anyway, the person notified the post office, and they x-rayed them. They were not glassware as they were claiming to be, and it turned out they were Dudleyas being shipped. I'm not sure. There have been so many poaching, I can't remember which country it was going to. I think that one was South Korea. But South Korea, China, Japan, anyway, got to be a lot of articles, and you would, some people were from the U.S., some were from different countries, sometimes working together, so people started, the law enforcement started sending me photos or sending me plants and said, okay, we think we caught these people at this place, do these plants match up? Since I'm the guy who was studying this obscure group that nobody in the world really knew much about other than, native plant enthusiasts knew about it. But a lot of people said, oh, aren't those ice plant? But anyway, they would just confiscate box after box after box of Dudleyas, thousands and thousands. It wasn't just, it was tons per month at one point. And I'm really glad they shifted to Dudleya farinosa, which is one of the most common and widespread. But still, if you go into an area, that's 2 acres of Dudleyas and you take out most of the Dudleyas, you're having a tremendous impact there. There were just more. So one of the things about Dudleya farinosa, this is me back in the day when I was young, I went out to the northernmost place where I knew any Dudleyas grew, and they weren't down by the sand, and it looked like this, the waves would maybe come up to here or something was my guess. Well, I climbed up about 30 feet off the ground, and right up here, I found driftwood. So, Dudleya farinosa, we know grows close to the coast. But if you're not out there in the worst storm of the winter, you don't realize that the waves are actually breaking over Dudleya farinosa every once in a while. So these are plants that are very tolerant of salt water. And when you bring them inland, sometimes mealybugs are not so good for them. And they will get a lot more mealybugs when they're away from the salt water. I actually tried an experiment where I stuck a bunch of Dudleyas in the saltwater tanks down at UCSC and left them there for up to 14 days. And they came out of there, and a number of them survived just fine for 2 weeks floating around in seawater. But all the mealybugs were dead. And so I'm wondering if, there's some pest control by being hit by salt water all the time. And that's one of the reasons it's a little harder to grow them in other conditions. They also get wind. The air circulation is perfect. Maybe they get some summer fog, but they're dry summers. So if you take these, and there are lots of UV light, so you take these and you put them into a windowsill inside a house in China, inside, Seoul, South Korea, most of these are going to die. And so it's really a shame that so many are being taken out that way. These are two different forms that, from a little more northerly. This is from pretty close to the southern extent. Dudleya farinosa. You can see a little bit of beveling at the end of the leaves here. You see how the lower bract is kind of attached at an angle. That's really unusual. This is not everybody wants to know this, but if you're really a fanatic, this kind of angled attachment is distinctive. They keep their dead leaves really well, really tough dead leaves. But the pale petal colors, that's another thing about them. But they vary in how broad the leaves are depending on the time of year and where you see them and all of that. So that's Dudleya farinosa, the one that's being poached the most. This is Dudleya pulverulenta. People have been taking these for landscapes for years. I used to, in the 80s, I was driving around the Santa Monica Mountains, and I was seeing them all over the cliffs around Mulholland Highway. I started noting 10, 20 years later, there are fewer and fewer out there. There's still some out there, but they're usually pretty high up on the cliffs on loose rock, where it would be pretty dangerous. You'd fall 20 feet onto the asphalt. So that's where they're doing well. But there's still lots of these, fortunately. But all around the world, this isn't just a problem with Dudleyas, but by getting out this story in a lot of publicity, international publicity, then we're hoping that not only do native plants, native succulents get preserved, but native succulents to Mexico, native succulents to Madagascar, South Africa, Zimbabwe, those places where plants are. It really seems that there's quite a market. It's really become a fad, not just in the U.S., but a big-time fad in China. And with that many potential customers, it doesn't have to be a large percentage of the population who are into it. So there are other kinds of threats to Dudleyas. I've been working with Dudleya verdiei, a little bit on and off since '83. And you see this red outline is the red outline of a fire that took place, the Springs fire, and Camarillo Springs, and it was devastating. It started fast, and it really burned a lot. But you notice I put in all the populations. These blue triangles are all within the zone of the fire. One estimate is between 90 and 99% of them were burned in this fire. I think it's probably a little closer to 90 to 95 rather than 99, but really devastated the populations. I had some that I collected in '83, still in cultivation. I propagated those. I collected seed from those, and got hired to also go out and select from each of the populations that were left, grow them on, sometimes taking things that were about a centimeter long by about 2 millimeters wide. Little tiny pieces. You look at them, dried up in the middle of summer. You said, there's no way that would live. And I got a number of them to live because I didn't want to. I was hired. The Fish and Wildlife Service, they went through all the permits. They wanted me to take as much as I could, but I'm going, well, I'm a conservationist. I want to take as little as I can, but get maximum genetic diversity. So anyway, I propagated a lot, and I'm still growing those and still passing them along to the different seed banks as I collect seed and plants to the National Park Service. So, trying to get all of that done so we really have a backup for these in the wild. This is a photo of it. It grows with the lichens. The lichens may help in terms of, sometimes holding a little soil for the seeds to germinate. Some people think the lichen is required for the Dudleyas. I don't think it's required, but it helps. They figure it might be 80 years for the lichen to recover completely. Sometimes they grow in little cracks without the lichens, and sometimes next to mosses. So they're coming back okay, but very slowly. Something that some of you might be growing a lot. I see a propagator in the group, you might or might not know about the Dudleya moth. It's a snout-nosed moth. And, for years I was growing Dudleyas, and I thought, oh, gee, everybody says don't water them in the summer. I must have watered it too much in the summer. It rotted and died. And when I finally started looking a little more closely, I realized that the moth was probably laying its eggs right in the center of the rosette. Tiny little caterpillar would go back and forth in one leaf. The one leaf would look kind of bad. Oh, well, it's just, I watered it a little too much. It's rotten. I pull it off and throw it away. But if I didn't get to it in time, the caterpillar would probably go back and forth and then hit the center of the stem and eat all the way through the stem and all the way down to the roots. And I'd have all these nice-looking leaves, and they start looking worse and worse and worse. And then I'd open it up and say, oh, gee, the thing rotted. But when I really looked at it, it was droppings from the larvae, and at the bottom were these little larvae with sort of turquoise innards when you squish them. Anyway, at one point they killed 30% of my collection. I tried all sorts of things, and the only thing that actually worked was going after them with a surveyor's flag, one of those wires, or a knife. And I tried systemics. The way I grow Dudleys, they grow so slow, they weren't pulling up the systemics fast enough to kill the caterpillars. I tried BT, I tried rubbing alcohol. Anyway, nothing really worked other than physically going after them. I have nets in the greenhouse, butterfly nets, try and catch the moths and kill them. Anyway, you may not think you have any, but if you have a big collection, particularly if somebody's given you something field collected, you may have these moths in there. When I looked at the confiscated plants, there were probably 3 different kinds of caterpillars. I can't tell orange tortricids from light brown apple moth, but they also had these Dudleya moths on them too. So they had 2 or 3 different kinds of caterpillars. They were shipping to China, shipping to Korea in the ones here. Other problems are invasive non-native plants that outgrow various ice plant kinds of things, overgrow Dudleyas. Nitrogen deposition. When you're near a road, nitrogen from the cars will make it so the weedy grasses will grow faster and they'll outgrow the Dudleyas. This is down in Southern California. So enforcement possibilities. Well, first, you want habitat preservation, but these folks were going into national and state parks and stealing them. So you need more than just habitat preservation. About a week and a half ago, I was working with getting material to the forensics labs in Sacramento. They're going to try and come up with a test to test so you can tell the difference between something that's been grown in cultivation with chemical fertilizers for a while versus one that was just ripped out of the wild. Pretty sensitive test, but they think they might be able to do that. So I'm providing them with material there. Trail cams, there have been undercover work that has helped, tracking cell phones, DNA work, microchipping them, maybe like they do with saguaros, who knows. They've had the tips, the hotline tips. One of the big busts was, I think somebody from the CNPS thought they saw somebody collecting abalone, thought they were poaching abalone. And when they got close to them, they saw that in the bags they had plants and they had pots and soil in the back of the car. So they took pictures of the people, the license plates, the bags, the Dudleyas, and those people were busted. And anyway, that was the Palmdale bust. And she was shipping things to her sister in China. And that was just somebody looking out and paying attention. And then nursery inspections, and this is part of the reason why they want to come up with these tests. There are people in Southern California, when they got busted when they were trying to ship them over without permits and lying about what was in the boxes, they said, we'll put them in the nursery for a week, and then call the inspectors over and say, look, we've been growing them here for years. So all they would have would be my word, well, that looks like it was collected in the field. That looks like a 40-year-old plant. Why haven't they been selling it in the last 40 years? And so if we have forensics to go with me, or if we have me to back up the forensics, might make a better case. So I never thought I'd be spending so much time talking to law enforcement. But they've got these little T-shirts, the Succulent Enforcement Team, and they even gave me a T-shirt. I was really happy. So I was out at Point Reyes. My wife and I went on vacation. We went out, windy day. She sat in the car. She said, let's go for a hike somewhere, but I don't want to just go look at Dudleyas in the wind. So I went out there, and I was looking at the area, and some, people had been climbing up on the hills, and they knocked some Dudleya out, and they were down on the grass. They might live for a couple of months, but they weren't going to live forever. And so I said, well, I'll just stick them back in here. I mean, that's unauthorized habitat restoration, but I'm only moving them about 10 feet. And so I came back a year later, and, the same plant was bigger and had more rosettes. And so I thought, perfect, that's all you need to do. If it falls off onto the ground, shove it back into some crevice, and all is good. It turned out when they had the night vision goggles, this is the exact spot where they were catching another group of people at Point Reyes. They were right out of that parking lot, all over the place. They didn't even see the people with the goggles, and they caught them. They caught them in the act. But I hope they didn't take these plants that I worked to put back in place. If you catch the people soon enough, and you know that the plants haven't gone into a nursery, they haven't been exposed to cinnamon fungus or sudden oak death or any of these other phytophthora fungi, then you can plant them back. And so we had a nice party, and there's Sam over here. Sam was really excited about putting the Dudleyas back out into one of our state parks. I won't say which one, but a couple of weeks after, a week after we were putting these back, I was giving a talk at a local high school, and I said, yeah, and we put them back in the wild, and I was showing pictures, and the kids said, I took one from that state beach last week.
Oh no!
And I mean, it's it's incredible how many people I've talked to. So I just took a couple, herpetologists and ornithologists and mammalogists and geologists, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, state parks, people, national parks. I mean, one or two here or there is not making the same kind of impact as tons, but lots of people have been taking them out of the wild for years. But one thing that was cool is we went back to this same spot. So you see that's Sam planting Dudleya farinosa on the Big Sur coast, and there's Sam with her Dudleya farinosa on the Big Sur coast 14 months later with a photographer. He's based in France and Phoenix, and he rode his motorcycle out from Phoenix to photograph us out there with successfully regrowing farinosas. I'm not sure if some died and if some have been poached since, but there were definitely some of her plants were right there, and we were really happy with that. We've done other restoration. This is out, that big rock. What's the lighthouse down there? Point Sur. Point Sur with a rare and endangered manzanita, Arctostaphylos edmundsii. So we've done that kind of replanting too when I was working at the Arboretum. So sometimes you need some technical ability. This is what I did this last weekend. I didn't find any on this dome, but on some of the domes nearby. And it's really weird when you're trying to figure out, where are the Dudleyas. We looked at, several different domes of different steepness, and sometimes the Dudleyas were 100 feet up, and sometimes they were right on the ground. But you had Dudleyas just in crevices, southwest facing, just blazing hot. You had them with selaginella, which is kind of thing that needs some moisture. You had them with these little, it's dried up by this time of year, but little monkey flowers, probably little yellow monkey flowers and moss, where the seep coming right out of the rocks is probably really wet in the springtime. This is moss just sitting right on granite and hot area underneath manzanitas. There was one of them just directly in the shade, the afternoon shade of a pine tree. So they were growing, but then they were only growing in very few places there. The Dudleyas are always trying to fool me about where I would see them or where I wouldn't see them. Because you would expect, there's all this granite. The habitat looks similar, but I would walk for an hour and a half and I wouldn't see another Dudleya. What is it? I don't know in some cases.
Poachers.
This was a pretty obscure place. No poachers have been where I was hiking. It was, yeah. The climbers don't even know about it. So one of the things we want to do is try and reduce the demand. So I gave 11,000 seeds to statewide California Native Plant Society. And I think every one of them came up.
Wow.
And so Dan Klusenkamp, who a few of you may know, who's the executive director of CNPS, he was on KQED radio talking about it and says, well, we'll have to figure out some way to give these away. I don't know, we'll have like Etsy-style parties with wine and cheese, and people bring in their fancy pots, and they'll pot them all up as a party, and then we'll find some way to give them away. Anyway, he's refined his ideas a little bit since then, but that's what he was saying on the radio. And so we may do it around Christmas time. The Wall Street Journal wants to fly out a videographer and film that, and film me climbing up to on some rocks somewhere. So we're trying to get publicity, and it's not just Dudley. It's preserving native plants in their habitats throughout California and around the world. And so this is one of the things we're trying. We want education. We want this to be an educational thing. Maybe it'll flood the market. At least in California, it ought to make it so they're pretty cheap. Show rules in other countries. The cactus and succulent shows have rules. Most of the places in the States and in England where you can't show plants that have been collected, wild collected ever, or in some cases, well, not wild collected within the last 30 or 40 years or something like that. But some of them are moved to not wild collected, just propagated from seed or cutting in cultivation. And so if we can spread this ethos around the world, that would be a good thing too. Because some of these people were buying, 50, 100-year-old Dudleyas for $300, $500, $1,000, and then showing them off to their friends or putting them in shows in Japan. So anyway, get that ethos spread around the world. Have responsibly produced plants with the plant giveaway that I mentioned, tissue culture. Kevin in the back there is working on a master's project, and I gave him some plants and seeds yesterday, and he's been talking with me about what kind of strategies he would have in terms of tissue culture to help some of the most endangered species. And he works at Tree of Life Nursery, and what people can do working together with all of these different techniques so we can produce plants that are backups for plants in the wild, and plants for people to buy so they're not stealing plants from the wild. So glad Kevin's here today too. So yeah, I mean, look, they were really successful. And these are easy. Dudleya are easy from seed. Do not cover them with anything. I know some people get by with that, but the seeds are tiny. And then when I went through and I counted every single seed, I got 100% germination when I didn't cover them with anything. When I put a little bit of soil over, it's like 50% germination. A little bit of sand, well, maybe 70. it just wasn't the same as if you just put them right on top. People in Southern California put them in a little, they get a cookie box, a plastic cookie box, and little greenhouse. In Santa Cruz, I never did that. I just planted them in the winter and kept them moist enough. I was worried about fungus in a little closed-in greenhouse, but whatever works for you. All right, so shift topics a little bit. Talk about a few more species. Dudleya blockmanni, a little summer dormant one. These, if you have these, I would be surprised, but if you do have any of these summer deciduous ones, now is the time to water them. And I say October 1st, you water them and then they sprout. I've got one up in the front here where you see these little tiny leaves in the dead flower stalks. That's just sprouted in the last 3 or 4 days. And so some things are dormant, but you don't have to be so religious about not watering them in the summer. I find that people in LA say, oh, they're just so hard for me, I water them, and I water them once every 6 weeks and they die from me overwatering. Well, if it's 105 degrees and you got them in a little tiny black pot in LA, might be that they got too hot and the roots cooked. So, if you're in Sacramento, you're in LA, there are parts of this, Santa Clara Valley are pretty darn hot in the summertime. So, west facing. So, they need some shade and occasional water through the summer. Anyway, my daughter was out there with me, and she even got the excuse on her homework, it blew off into the Pacific Ocean. So anyway, she was out there with me, and we were doing research we were naming this plant here, Dudleya noma. See the penny for scale, there's one flower, three leaves. This is, it's in full flower. It produced seeds that year. So it's one of the smaller ones. But unfortunately, after they took off all of the deer and the elk and the cows and the horses and everything, the Dudleya noma started growing bigger out on the island, and these may well have been poached from the island. That's why it would be really nice to have that test to know whether or not these were all poached. I was talking about the seeds, and you can see the size of the seed here. And sometimes you're looking at, they'll be a little clearer and a little smaller, and those maybe didn't get fertilized. But you get a little bit of brownish or rust color. And look, here's the head of a pin, and the cotyledons on these little guys. So when they germinate, they're pretty tiny. And then if you forget to, you start in October, November, and you forget to water them for a couple of weeks, sometimes towards the spring, you look in your pot and say, oh, it's empty, they're all dead. Don't throw away the pot. They may still be there. I've had a lot of people being surprised. You water them through the summer now and again, and sometimes, this week in September or the 1st of October, all of a sudden you look in there and one day you've got this tiny little leaf is sprouting out of what you didn't even think existed. So don't give up on them. So I've been working on trying to make pretty plants. They've been stealing a lot of plants from the wild. They're going to die. I've been trying to grow pretty plants that will do better in cultivation, or more likely to survive, less likely to get rust and fungus, and little red spots all over them. A lot of the things you see out in the wild have red dots all over them. People think, oh, well, that's just a pigment, but it's probably a rust. I did a little section through it and looked under the microscope, and the times I've done it, yeah, it's a rust. It's not that it's not just pigment. So I've been trying to make pretty white ones, and been having a lot of fun. Some of these are several generations old. You cross a white one with a white one. Sometimes the first generation, there's almost no wax, especially if they're not really very closely related species. And then the next generation, you get a whole mix of things from not very waxy to some that are really good. So sometimes you have to go 2 or 3 generations to start getting really pretty white waxy ones. Some of them look like this looks like Echeveria laui to me. It's got this little tiny thing here. Makes me realize, oh yeah, this is one of my ones that has a little bit of Dudleya pachyphytum in it. There's a Dudleya pachyphytum in that pot with the pot that looks like a rock. That's kind of fun. Another, it's a different hybrid with Dudleya pachyphytum. You don't see flowers like this in the wild at all. Pink and, campanulate, bell-shaped flowers like this. This one's on a really nice white rosette. Sometimes it's hard to get the whole plant in one photo. This is one, it's not my most spectacular one. It's this one. I'm going to trip over the cords. It's this guy right here that I did in 1987. I planted the seed in '88. It was a plant that Reed Morin had collected in 1948, crossed with one of mine that I'd collected in 1983. And we called it Edna's Echidna after a friend of mine. It sort of looked echidna-like when it was all full, full thing here. This has been sold commercially. It has a nice sort of bell-shaped pink and white flowers, and you can see some of those. So this is one of the ones that does well indoors. And so, if you're going to sell something for people to put indoors, why not get one that's easy rather than one that's probably going to die on you? Now I need to get a really white one that'll grow well indoors too, but I'm working on it. There's some with great colors to the flowers. And wouldn't it be nice to have this color flower on a healthy plant that would do well and not be quite so fussy as some of the ones first generation out of the wild. There's some red-leaved Dudleyas. Most of them are really hard to grow, and most of them aren't this red. This is about 10 or 20 generations in, starting with a little bit of red on the underside of the leaf. Year after year, just taking the reddest ones that look the best, planting them again, reddest ones, and apparently people, I put this in a journal article, and I've gotten requests from people from Korea. Kevin's gotten requests from people from Korea. They want these red ones. And so, either through tissue culture or seed, these are really pretty prolific from seed. Let's get out some healthy red ones. These don't exist in the wild. If that's what people want to buy, then great. No more poaching. So anyway, it's been a lot of fun to try and make pretty red ones. I've just set things up at my house, and I've got white ones. Anyway, just trying to make pretty plants, as well as do the classification in the taxonomy. I need to name about 8 more species. One of them, it's in Southern California. There are about 250 plants, 7 different populations, but I've only been able to find 250 plants. I went there, when was that? My daughter was 13. It was like 15 years ago. I went to one of these populations. It's since been wiped out. It's now a rock climbing area. And so now there's 6 populations, for those 200. So I need to name it so it can get some protection. We're trying to work on a book that may or may not come out. I quoted this to Kevin the other day. The more I know about Dudleya, the less I know. So in terms of classification, it's a tough group to work with. There's a Silicon Valley Dudleya that I need to name. It's quite rare. It might be in 2 places, though, now. They're separated by about 30 or 40 miles in really different habitats.
Is the serpentine one?
No, the serpentine one is, that's common as dirt. It's a federally endangered species, and California rare plant ranks list 1B. So the Santa Clara Valley Dudleya is really rare, and this one that's unnamed is way more rare than that. So it's a special thing, and this is one perhaps that needs to either be in the seed banks or Kevin working on tissue culture. Somebody has to work on this so that this one gets preserved. Pulveria lenta again,
where does that grow normally?
Pulveria lenta grows from extreme southern most Monterey County, right next to the San Andreas Fault on somebody's farm, where I had to sneak over there and take pictures of it. Vern Yaden, if any of you know, he told me where it was. So we could I could confirm his record that yes, it was in Monterey County. From there to a couple hundred miles south in Baja California, but quite a bit around from the Santa Monica Mountains to San Diego County, quite a bit.
But pretty dry.
Pretty dry, but if you know where Julian is, not over that side of the mountains towards Anza Borrego, and you get a different species of big white ones, or sort of big white ones. So not all the way into the desert, but pretty dry. And when you grow them, like Yerba Buena Nursery, in the middle of winter, they take the 1 gallon pots, they turn them all sideways and pile them up so the water wouldn't collect. In the big white dry area ones, you want to keep some water off the leaves. Dudleya lanceolata. This is kind of halfway between lanceolata and cespitosa, but it grows on sand. We call it Dudleya cespitosa for you fanatics who worry about names. But it has more lance-like leaves, and it's kind of confusing to a lot of folks. These are some of the sort of narrow-leaved Dudleya cespitosas. If anybody wants to know about Dudleya cespitosa versus Frank Reinel versus Byron's Hassie, we could talk about that afterwards. But basically, some of the cespitosas have these narrow leaves and are kind of pretty. I've got one that I've named Lucy in the Sky, one of these Lucia form Dudleya cespitosa, and I've got one up here in the gallon pot. The advantage of that in terms of growing is people in Asia want plants that look like they're old and branchy. And this particular one gets sort of old-looking and branchy fast. And so this is something, I gave a couple to Kevin. Maybe Tree of Life grows it, maybe they don't. Maybe the Arboretum grows it or not. I gave the Arboretum at UC Santa Cruz, where I've retired from. I gave them about 50 cuttings. So I sell them occasionally. Cactus and Succulent Societies, I've sold like 3 so far. So if that gets out there, something that's you can do it, just from cuttings really fast. Maybe that helps. This is it, sometimes the year has a really nice blush to it. If you grow it in the shade, it doesn't have this pink, but bright yellow flowers. And so I've just named this, and I hope I don't get sued for using the name, but who knows what's been copyrighted. There are massive hybrid swarms that involve Dudleya palmeri. I'm growing just random seedlings that are open pollinated in a greenhouse. Who knows what the other parent is, but if you grow up 200 of them and see which ones have the prettiest flowers but also have healthy plants. Gave some seed to Kevin also.
Where was that photo?
Well, I can't really tell you. But, northern San Luis Obispo County, southern Monterey County. There were poachers there too. But they're being responsibly propagated now, and so we hope to get those out to everybody. This one, for the life of me, it looks like Dudleya farinosa crossed with Dudleya cymosa pumila. Neither of them are supposed to be within about 20 miles of there. So Dudleyas are always fooling me. Dudleya cymosas, I should have done this early before people were falling asleep, but this is about classification of Dudleyas and what's so tough about them. Why did I put this at the end? But you're supposed to have a dried, pressed, dead specimen and a line drawing and a collector and a collection location and a collection date to name a species. So all we have is, it was either California or Mexico. Somebody brought back seed, and years later somebody grew it. The seed went to England, and maybe the plant was growing in France, and somebody drew a painting, and we don't know whether that was really the petal color or whether it's faded over time from the original petal color. But this is the type specimen. This defines Dudleya cymosa, subspecies cymosa, and that's not really very good in terms of science. And I wish we knew more. But in Santa Clara Valley, here we have growing with 3 or 4 kinds of ferns in one of the canyons. I won't tell you exactly which canyon, but you probably stumble across it. But so, okay, Santa Clara Valley, growing with ferns, Dudleya cymosa. Growing in harsh, dry conditions, just cooking in another place. In the Sierra Nevada, harsh, dry, west-facing. Oh, it's all white leaves now and orange flowers. But they have green leaves with bright yellow flowers. Bright yellow flowers, with some red on the sepals. And sometimes they're just all yellow flowers. And sometimes they're kind of like this in the Santa Monica Mountains, and sometimes they're, near Yosemite, they're all green with orange flowers, unless you go outside of Yosemite where they're green or white with yellow flowers. And so these are all Dudleya cymosas, and there's a lot of work left to be done. It's just too much for me to finish in my lifetime, I think. There's just too many kinds, all in this one subspecies. So it's like Reed says, the more I know about Dudleyas, the less I know. And you can tell me a plant and I might not be able to name it. There's even a really rare one on not all of the limestone, but just one of the limestone cliffs in this one particular area. The common one is a few hundred yards away, and then the rare one is on a different limestone cliff right next to it. Lots and lots of rosettes. Look at that penny. Look how many rosettes, for, cymosas, people used to say, oh, well, they don't branch. But this guy does. The rare one and the more common one as they grow near each other anyway. Who knows? So hopefully DNA, some people will call it genomics, will help us sort out a few of these oddballs. But there's more diversity out there than people have realized. There are more species out there. So far, if you look at how rare something is, we have a California rare plant rank, or federally listed. If you look how rare things are, and you map that over on Baja California too, you could say 39 out of the 68 species that exist are already rare and endangered. And some of these 8 that I haven't named, or more than 8 that I haven't named, are also really localized and are really rare. So hopefully we'll get some other things. Here's another limestone one with lots of branches, but completely different flowers. This is about 15 miles away from the other limestone one. Anyway, this is part of what you do is you compare them. Do they look different to you? Can you measure them? Or do you use the DNA, or use both? Both is better than that. We got famous for a little while for naming one after Jimi Hendrix. That one's fairly endangered. There's actually one that's about 2 miles away that's way more endangered, that didn't get any publicity at all. I gave Kevin a plant of this, the Dudleya crassifolia. It's much more endangered than this. But on the other hand, one farmer could wipe this out with a plow in one day. Even though there are 10,000 plants, it's spread out over a few acres. But it's, there's a subsidy sometimes. If you plant something, you plant the wheat, even if the wheat doesn't succeed, you'll get your subsidy. So there is some incentive on that mesa to just do some farming. And you just go out there, on a different year, and you find 10 acres that somebody's just plowed and put a fence around and gotten their subsidy. And so that could happen to Hendrixii. And unfortunately, it turns out it hybridizes everything in the greenhouse. So it's hard to keep pure ones. This is the crassifolia that's even rarer. Doesn't even look like a Dudleya. It looks like an Anacampsaros or something like that, if you know those from South Africa. So if people are poaching and wiping out Dudleyas, well, let's just get rid of Dudleyas. Who cares about plants, right? Well, we care about plants, but other people might get excited when you say, well, look, you know, the swallowtails, they're getting nectar even if they're not pollinating. There are lots of things that are getting nectar. Some of them are pollinating, some of them maybe they aren't. It takes a while. You know, it's hard to see the hoverfly here and the bumblebee. The hummingbird's easier. I was in the greenhouse. This is an obscure population of a common species up in the Sierra. I don't know what butterfly that was. There's one butterfly, the subspecies is extinctus, because by the time it was named, it was extinct. It only fed on Dudleyas, where they have all those quarries right near Azusa in LA, San Gabriel Canyon area. Oh yeah, and then the things that eat the pollinators, or eat the things like little mice that chew off the flower stalks. Well, maybe that's feeding the owls and other birds. So this is a new species, white star from the Channel Islands. We try and grow as many as we can, have plants so that when researchers need to do research, they say, wait, you don't have to go collect them. They're right here. And then also, probably 80% of these are just seedlings that I've grown trying to make pretty things too. So some of them we sell through the UC-SC Arboretum. Some of the ones I grow at home I sell at Cactus and Succulent shows. I've been distributing them. I gave away seeds to lots of people, and then Tree of Life has been selling Dudleas for years, but now they have some of mine too. And these are some of the pretty red ones that I'm working on. So, you know, wouldn't it be nice to get people to buy something other than the poached things? So thanks to Lisa here for helping me with this, and Mark Silos who suggested this. If you want to make donations, I can give you suggestions of where you can make donations. Statewide CNPS or CNPS in Santa Cruz County chapter, UC-SC Arboretum to help with. I've got to move all of my plants from one place to another. They want where I've been growing the plants for other plants to sell. You know, I retired, so anyway, I'm having to move everything from one place to another, and that's expensive. And so if there are any donations there too. Santa Barbara Botanic Garden is doing the DNA research. So there are lots of possible places. You can send money, just tell me. You know, it doesn't have to go in my pocket, it just has to help Dudleyas. Anyway, and on a positive note, these are some of the Dudleyas that we put back in the wild, and 14 months later, they were still growing, and these are the happy people who helped us plant them. So thank you very much. Thanks for your patience.